Welcome to Sanctuary. I'm your host, Keisha Dyson. As American churches experience a rapidly changing religious landscape, mainline seminaries are adapting to prepare future church leaders to meet new challenges and opportunities to carry out God's mission. Join us for a groundbreaking new approach to education that's unfolding in 3 distinct Chicago seminaries, united in an unprecedented collaboration. Today on Sanctuary. In 2023, the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago and McCormick Theological Seminary became tenants of Catholic Theological Union. This unique co-location of 3 seminaries representing 3 different faiths offers a platform and model for vibrant academic and spiritual exchanges. Joining us today to talk about the future of seminary education is President James Neiman of the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, President Barbara Reed of Catholic Theological Union, and President David Crawford of McCormick Theological Seminary. Let's start by just getting to know each one of your seminaries. I'll start with you, President Reed.
Thank you, Keisha. CTU was founded in 1968, right after the Second Vatican Council, and it was inspired by a speech that Cardinal Sunens gave at the University of Chicago, in which he outlined the idea of a new and very creative approach to seminary education. Mm-hmm. Instead of being out in bucolic settings, the seminary should be right in the middle of the city, near a major university, and with opportunities for ecumenical collaboration. In those days, that was a very innovative approach to seminary education. Now, 56 years later, the most logical next important step in our ecumenical collaboration is to join together in our co-location in one common setting here at 5416 South Cornell.
President Neiman, can you tell me a little bit about the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago?
Sure, thank you, Keisha. We were formed in 1962 from the merger of 6 predecessor seminaries dating back to 1860, all across the upper Midwest, all Lutheran seminaries. When the school was reformed in 1962, it was also relocated from all of those places, intentionally moved to the south side of Chicago to be near the University of Chicago and again in the city. And you're hearing themes that are very similar with our schools. There was a desire to be in communion with other Lutheran groups, to be in connection with other seminaries here in Hyde Park, and to grow together in our understanding of God's witness in the city.
And President Crawford.
Thank you, Keisha. Lots of common themes I think you'll hear throughout the interview today. McCormick Theological Seminary was founded in 1829. It was founded originally in southern Indiana, and in 1859, Cyrus McCormick of International Harvester and the Reaper fame decided that Chicago, this bustling, growing urban city, needed a Presbyterian seminary. So he basically arranged with the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church at that time to move this small seminary from southern Indiana to Chicago. We had a number of homes in Chicago, starting in the South Loop in the lobby of a hotel at Harrison and Clark Street. We made successive moves over the next few years and landed ultimately on a campus in Lincoln Park. And Lincoln Park back in those days is not the Lincoln Park we know it today to be. It was industrial for many of those years. And so for about 100 years, we had our campus in Lincoln Park, which is now part of the DePaul University Lincoln Park campus. And in 1975, for many of the same reasons I think you're hearing from my friends, we decided it was time for us to be part of this really vibrant community of seminaries and the Divinity School at the University of Chicago here in Hyde Park. So in 1975, we moved here to Hyde Park. And originally, we were over at Woodlawn and 56th Street before we decided we would work with the Lutheran School, with whom we shared classrooms at that time, and a library. to build our own building over on University Avenue, 5460 South University Avenue.
I'd like to tease that out a bit because although it sounds like these schools have circled around one another, you still remain three very distinct institutions, and yet something triggered the moment where you decided to co-locate. What happened?
Well, I wish I could say it was my idea and that I invited Jim and David to come and locate here at CTU, but it started with Jim approached me to ask if we still had the empty space that we had left unbuilt out at the west end of our 4th floor, and whether we'd be interested in talking with him about building out that space and taking over the rest of our 4th floor to become the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. And I was very keen to do so because the building that we have here was built in the early 2000s when we had triple the number of students that we do now. And of course, work patterns have changed so much, and not everybody's in their office all day, every day. So we had a lot of empty space that I was very keen to be able to share. And then some months later, when David approached me, I wasn't sure we had enough space to make it work, but after we did some studies and talked to each of our faculty members and staff members about what would work to meet their needs to do their work well, we found that we did have enough space. And with a lot of creativity, it's working. And we are very, very delighted that in response to all 3 of our traditions have a very strong concern for care for earth and good use of our resources. And so for us, it's a particular delight not to have so much empty space. And also it's brought so much life and energy back into our building and so much interchanges. We've been friends for a long time. We've shared our Doctor of Ministry program is a joint program among our 3 schools, and we've collaborated on World Mission Institute and World Mission efforts for years and years, and we've team taught in each other's courses, and our students have cross-registered in each other's courses for years and years. So this is the next natural move to enhance that collaboration.
I love how you describe the ecumenical relationship, but the truth is that these faiths have three very distinct traditions and a deep history where you all weren't always in love with each other and wanting to share space together. Can we talk a little bit about the distinction of the traditions and where the differences lie, but how these 3 schools are working through those differences, and to share space together?
Yeah, something like this would clearly not have happened in 1923 and 24 when there was sort of a virulence of animosity between some religious groups in the United States. I'm sad to say. I think what's happened in the intervening time, particularly in the late 20th century, is that the long, careful, slow work of scholars and church leaders to bring ecumenical understanding led to various agreements or understandings or statements that gave a basis for us to be together. So, for example, David's tradition and my own are full communion partners through a result of various kinds of negotiations over the course of scores of years. And if we go back to 1999, the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, I think is another example of where we were at some rapprochement with Roman Catholics about how we understood some core doctrines, and that's also within the context of having had Lutheran Roman Catholic dialogue in the United States for over 50 years, now in its 12th round, I think. So those kinds of things were the basis in terms of theology and thought, but also there were opportunities that presented themselves in all the ways that Barbara's talked about with different ways in which we shared programs, people, motivations both to be together, the pull, and motivations to leave behind what was no longer working for us, the push.
For us, it's been a little bit different because McCormick has really, despite our long and wonderful history with the Presbyterian Church USA, only about 5 or 10% of our students are Presbyterians today. And part of that change, I think, for us really happened when we made the move from Lincoln Park to Hyde Park. We became a much more diverse institution. We became much more ecumenical, and I think our relationship with LSTC in particular allowed us to sort of think differently and recruit differently. And so I think our appeal to the students in communities around Chicago, particularly in our South Side communities, really put McCormick in sort of a different place in all of this in terms of ecumenical development and how we view our curriculum and how we view our place in the community. So this was a fairly natural process for us to kind of come together like we have here.
And yet we're naming this experience as unprecedented, right? Never been done before as far as we can trace in history. What makes this an unprecedented co-location?
Well, because CTU had space, that was one. Because we all realized, I want to pick up again on the stewardship theme that you touched on, Barbara. I think it's a really important dimension of this. We all realized, like many seminaries across the country realized but can't necessarily act upon, that we have far more space than what we really need for our programs. And we have different ways of doing our programs. Including outreach to people who don't ever come to our campuses. And all of those things meant, in our particular case, we moved from a situation where we had 127,000 square feet in 3 buildings. And we're now in a space that is more like about 23 to 25,000 square feet, all told, for our operations, and it's more than enough. That tells you that a lot's changing in theological education and our understanding, again, about being good stewards.
Let's talk about the changes in theological education. What's happening?
Well, one thing that everybody's experiencing is that there's a decline in the number of people who identify with religious institutions, especially among young people. Many who claim to be spiritual but don't want to identify with any particular church or institution are very skeptical, and for good reasons, of the institutional church. In my own denomination, the decline in the number of young men and women who are interested in religious life has a big impact on us at CTU because this school was founded by 3 men's religious communities and then has grown to 21 that now own the school. And then there are about 40 communities of women religious that make up our students, alongside the laymen and women that are almost of equal number to the religious in the school. And as those numbers entering religious life decline, that has a very concrete impact on the size of our student body. And it's more challenging at this point in time for lay people, at least in the Catholic tradition, to find meaningful, good jobs. In this archdiocese, for example, the number of parishes that have been closed or merged as there has been the process of Renew My Church is really significant, and that impacts our graduates in terms of what kinds of positions are available for them. Now, many of our graduates don't work in parishes. They work as chaplains and hospital chaplains and prison chaplains and campus ministers and high school religion teachers, for example. But still, there are many challenges for our lay students, not only in securing a good job afterwards, but also most of them are working full-time, raising families, and only able to study part-time and chip away at their degree a little bit at a time, and sometimes it takes them 5 or 6 years to finish the degree. It's a big commitment, and it's very expensive.
I was going to say, relative to enrollment, Presbyterian Church USA was probably 3 million plus members 30 years ago. Today it's about 1 million. So there's been a decline in church membership and those who attend church, and as Barbara alludes to, those who identify as spiritual but not religious. So the pool of candidates, traditional candidates, has been shrinking for many, many years. But I think the other thing that Barbara's hitting on as well is the cost. We're not the law school across the street at the University of Chicago. We're not training people who are going to come out and get $200,000 a year jobs. This is a commitment to their faith and the commitment to the church and the commitment to the community to serve. And so we have, over this period of time, continued to attract more and more bivocational people, more part-time students. So the career path of getting that degree has changed dramatically.
So let's talk about how each one of your institutions are adapting to the way that society is changing.
For us at LSTC, I'd say it's a matter of recognizing the changing kind of leadership that's needed within the congregations. The old model that David describes of a congregation with a pastor who is full-time and that's their primary, if not solitary, employment, those days are rapidly changing, if not have already changed, so that we have many congregations that are vacant, not because there's something wrong with the congregation, but there's just no way that they could afford what was necessary to do that kind of model. So you're talking about bivocational learning needs to be different, and also a recognition that perhaps the conventional theological curriculum that was formed by Schleiermacher at the University of Berlin in 1830 is no longer the kind of curriculum that we need. I'm not saying that we're not studying Bible or theology or history or care of souls. It's that we're doing it in different ways that are much more learner-centered. So a big change for us is increasingly doing things at a distance as well as in person, doing a sort of hybrid learning environment that's accessible and adaptable for other learners. Another way is to increasingly turn towards non-degree-based programs. So I think we'll always have a profile of having certain accredited graduate degrees that will be for what we always have understood as long-standing forms of ministry. But we're increasingly going to be providing resources in an asynchronous way, not at the same time, on-demand kind of resources that somebody can pick up according to what their schedule is, what their needs are, what they can afford. And in that way, we're going to be forming a base of faithful disciples as well as a base of people who are preparing for diaconal or pastoral ministry.
What do those changes look like at your institution?
Well, one of the things that impacts everybody in a huge way is the way that technology has developed in recent decades. And so certainly COVID forced everybody in education to learn how to teach online, learn online. CTU had already been offering online courses for a long time before COVID hit. We were very fortunate. Most of our faculty were already trained in how to teach online and adept at it. But when we came back out of the pandemic, we made a very conscious decision that we would update all of the technology in our classrooms so that we would be able to have not only any course being offered on campus is also available to distance learners. And so we've increased the number of students we can reach at a distance who never come to CTU, either because they live in another country or another part of the US that makes travel impossible for them to come here, but they can access top quality theological education. Of course, that produces all kinds of new challenges. How do you create the kind of sense of community among the student body and the relationships with faculty when you're not physically present to one another? Big challenges with that. But also, those are the kinds of challenges that our students and our graduates need to grapple with as they are preparing for their ministries. The use of technology in their ministries is also a new thing that somebody of my generation never had to learn how to do that when I was going to school. And other new needs that are emerging all of the time in the world and the church, in the number of in our tradition, the number of Spanish-speaking Catholics right here in the city of Chicago. More than 42% of Catholics in this archdiocese say that they are Spanish-speaking, not Hispanic. That's an even bigger number, but Spanish-speaking. So one of our new innovations is beginning to offer courses in Spanish toward a degree in Spanish. Courses offered in Spanish toward an MDiv, an MA, MAM, MAPS, etc., to equip the Spanish-speaking church with top quality ministers. There are also, in our city and all throughout the country, so many new ministries that are emerging in need to attend to the flood of new people in this country, migrants and refugees. That's another area that is increasingly developing in our curriculum of how to minister well to newcomers.
Yeah, we do similarly. We adapted two of our programs, one to become taught fully in Spanish, and we also teach one of our Korean DMIN programs fully in Korean. And we've had a relatively long history going back to the 1980s of doing that, both teaching in Spanish and teaching in Korean. But that has produced for us two of our most, I think, vibrant cohorts of students over the last few years. And so that kind of adaptability and flexibility, which are words that you don't necessarily associate with seminaries or higher education, has it's been challenging for not just administrators, but for our faculties as well, as they adapt to new students taught in new languages, teaching new curriculum. So it has put a lot of stress on the system. But I think for all of us, the pandemic allowed us to learn that we could be adaptable and be flexible, and really now respond to the fact that our students sort of tell us what they want, when they want it, how they want it delivered, and we have to be nimble enough to be able to be responsive to that. And as I say to our faculty regularly, that's the way it will probably always continue to be. We will not find that space where we'll do something for the next 100 years, maybe 5 or 10 at the most, and we'll have to adapt again. So these changes actually have been, I think, for most of us, they weren't easy to get through, but they've put us in a position to, I think, really change the face of not just theological education, but higher education generally, and allowed us to reach into communities that we might not otherwise have reached into.
Can I ask what the response from students has been?
Very, very positive. Kind of from the beginning for a lot of our students. In fact, I think it was easier for some of our students in particular because they'd come here to take classes and they love the building. And there are lovely common spaces within the building. And so what you get to see for our students who are in classroom and not remote, these sort of organic things happening where they bump into each other, they get to know one another. They get time to spend sitting and having lunch out in the atrium. And so those kind of organic things, I think, are starting to, it's that life in the building that Barbara alluded to earlier. You start to see opportunities.
All right, so now's the time to pull out your crystal balls and to look ahead into the future of theological education. What do you see lying ahead, and how do you see each of your seminaries shaping that future?
Yeah, some of the things that we've already been talking about are really, I think it's that we're at such an early moment still about the changes that will be for the long term, and I'm always hesitant about actually talking about the long term because that long term has foreshortened considerably within our own lifetimes. But I would say that the ability to have a wider range of access for more and more kinds of learners, and learners who are different from our conventional learners who were preparing for an ordered form of ministry. I think that's going to be the major change in theological education. How are our schools about preparing disciples, not simply about preparing leaders ordained or diaconal or what have you? That's probably the main change that I see, and that we do it collaboratively and cooperatively with one another.
President Reed?
I think of how what a sea change there has been just in my own lifetime. I grew up in a very insulated Catholic world where we weren't even supposed to set foot into a Protestant church, and where we thought Catholics were going to be the only ones going to heaven. When I think now of what the tremendous shifts have been just in my lifetime, I expect that going into the future, that it's just normal that these kinds of relationships and partnerships become part of the fabric of our being, and that we approach everything about theological education about what can we learn from the other who is different from us, that doesn't threaten my own identity, but yet enhances both me and them, and that none of us can go it alone into the future. Those days are long gone.
Yeah, I would, on all fronts, be in agreement with what my colleagues have shared. I think this opportunity for us is a chance really to sort of express hope that both for theological education and the church and society itself, that our coming together in its own small way perhaps gives people a sense that these things can happen. And sometimes they happen out of necessity. But I think hopefully what you've heard today is that this was built on relationship. This was trust, this was friendship, this was working together across many, many years, and then timing that allowed us all to kind of come together the way we have. And it wasn't without sacrifice. Jim's school had to go through some loss on a campus they had occupied since 1966, and similarly, we had people who were very attached to our building. And to Barbara's credit, if it hadn't been for her and the willingness of people here to sacrifice their offices to make space for us and accommodate us, it was, I hope, an example of just how hard it is, but also of what can come of it if you're willing to make those kinds of sacrifices, if you're willing to kind of get out of the not invented here, or we have to do it our way, or we're particularly unique and we have to do it a certain way. I think what it has done for all of us is open the doors to look at the world a little differently, as Barbara's saying. And for me, it's a hopeful sign that I hope others will follow.
I think that the thing you're touching on there about how also our schools working together, our churches working together, can be a model, not some perfect example, it's not, but can show it is possible in a fractious and disagreeing society to honor and respect difference, to appreciate the diversity among our students and among our the people across our society, and to find ways to build bonds that respect those differences and yet also grow and enrich who we are together. I think that's happening in a small way in our three schools, and it can be a sign for others too.
Presidents Neiman, Reed, and Crawford, thank you. And thank you for joining us. You can connect with us today through email, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Find all the links on our website at gcbm.org. I'm Keisha Dyson for Sanctuary. Thank you. Thank you.